Welcome to your deep dive on game theory.
Yeah.
Yeah, we're going way beyond those dusty textbooks today, using the articles and research that you shared to really uncover how game theory applies to your life.
Mhm.
Think of game theory kind of like a secret decoder ring
Yeah.
for, how people make decisions when everyone is trying to win. It's strategic thinking for real-world scenarios, and trust me, it's way more relevant than you might think.
What's really cool is that game theory, it's not just stuck in those academic circles. It pops up in like your everyday choices, interactions with others, even in global events. And this deep dive will shed some light on those connections, revealing the strategic dance happening all around you.
Yeah, for sure. And one of the things that really struck me from the sources you sent was how often we find ourselves in situations that resemble these classic game theory scenarios without even realizing it. Like, we're all players in this giant game, but we don't know the rules.
That's a great observation. One of the best examples is the prisoner's dilemma. It just perfectly shows the push and pull between self-interest and, working together. Imagine you're in a negotiation, let's say for a new job. You and the potential employer both want the best deal. So do you push for that higher salary, even if it means they might walk away? Or do you play it safe and you might be leaving some money on the table?
Ooh, that's a tough one. It's like whatever you choose, there's some risk involved.
Yeah.
So that's where game theory comes in, right? It helps you make the most strategic decision.
Exactly. Game theory gives you a framework for analyzing, all the potential outcomes of different choices.
Right.
You're taking into account what that other player might do. And in your job negotiation example, understanding the company's needs, their typical salary ranges, and even your own worth in the marketplace all becomes super important for making that decision.
So it's not about being cutthroat and just winning at all costs, right? It's more about, understanding how everything works together and making a calculated decision.
That actually reminds me of another concept from your sources, the Nash equilibrium. Can you break that down for us?
Of course. The Nash equilibrium basically describes, a situation where nobody wants to change their strategy, assuming everyone else stays the course. It's a point of stability where everyone's doing their best based on what others are doing. Kind of like finding that, that perfect balance point.
From what I read, it seems like the Nash equilibrium, it doesn't always mean that everyone gets the best possible outcome right. It's more about finding that stable state, even if it's not perfect.
That's key. The Nash equilibrium, it isn't necessarily about, getting the optimal results for everyone. It's about reaching a point where nobody can improve their own situation by just changing tactics. Think about a stalemate in chess. Neither player can make a move that helps them without being at a disadvantage. Gotcha. So how can we actually use this concept in real life? It can't all be theoretical chess matches, can it?
Absolutely not. Let's take traffic, for example. Think about rush hour. Everyone wants to get home fast, right? If everyone's only thinking about themselves aggressively changing lanes, speeding, it just creates gridlock and makes the commute longer for everyone. So a Nash equilibrium here might involve drivers sticking to their lanes, maintaining a consistent speed. It might not be the fastest route for any one person, but it reduces that overall congestion and travel time for everyone.
Wow, that's a really clear example. It shows how individual self-interest can sometimes backfire, and how even a little cooperation can lead to a better outcome for everyone.
Exactly. The Nash equilibrium reminds us that even in competitive situations, there's this sweet spot where individual actions, even if they seem self-serving, can actually benefit everyone.
That makes me think about one of the coolest concepts from your research, the tit-for-tat strategy. Sounds simple, but the implications are huge.
Oh yeah. Tit for tat is a really powerful strategy for getting people to cooperate. It's based on reciprocity. You start by cooperating, and then you just mirror the other person's actions. So if they cooperate, you cooperate back. If they betray you, well, you respond in kind.
It's basically the golden rule, but with a strategic twist. I was so fascinated to learn how deep this strategy is in human behavior and even evolution.
Absolutely. The research you sent suggests that tit for tat was super important for our ancestors to survive. Those who could cooperate and return favors had a better chance of thriving in their environment. It's like cooperation is, in our DNA.
It is super interesting to think about how it evolved, but how does this apply to our modern lives?
Tit for tat is everywhere. Think about online reviews. When you have a good experience, you're more likely to leave a good review, encouraging others to do the same. But a bad experience usually leads to a bad review. It's like a warning. And this system of, feedback helps to keep a certain level of quality, all thanks to a simple strategy like tit for tat.
That's a great example. It makes you realize how a strategy that seems so basic can have such a big impact on how we interact and build trust, like a silent agreement that shapes our behavior.
Exactly. It shows how even simple game theory principles like tit for tat can help us understand complex systems and interactions. It's a reminder that strategy and decision making aren't just about our individual choices, but also about how those choices affect others and how they respond.
It's almost like we're all connected in this web of strategic decisions influencing each other in all these subtle ways.
Yeah, that's a really insightful way to put it. And this web of decisions, it goes beyond personal interactions. It even plays out on a global stage, influencing relationships between entire countries.
Oh, right. The sources you provided even talked about how game theory can apply to international relations.
Yeah.
Now, this is where things get really interesting.
For sure. Game theory helps us understand the strategic calculations behind international relations. We can kind of decode why countries act the way they do, even when their actions seem irrational or counterproductive at first glance.
One example that stood out to me was the chicken game they used to describe the Cold War arms race. Could you explain how that works?
Absolutely. The chicken game is a classic game theory scenario. Two players in a dangerous standoff, each one daring the other to back down. So in the Cold War, the US and the Soviet Union were locked in this nuclear arms race, each accumulating more and more powerful weapons. Neither side wanted to look weak by disarming, but they both knew that continuing to escalate could lead to mutually assured destruction.
It's like a high-stakes poker game, but with the fate of the world hanging in the balance.
That is a chillingly accurate analogy. And game theory helps us analyze the motives and potential outcomes of these types of situations. In the Cold War, both superpowers were trying to be as secure and as influential as possible, but at the same time, they were trying to avoid a catastrophic nuclear war. Every decision they made, every weapon they developed was a calculated move in this really complex and dangerous game.
It's amazing how game theory can help us understand events of that scale. It's like seeing behind the curtain of history, understanding the strategy that shaped those big moments.
That's the power of game theory. It's not just about simple interactions. It's about using strategic thinking to decode complex systems, from personal relationships to global politics, recognizing how individual choices and collective outcomes play off each other, and using that knowledge to navigate the world more effectively.
It's really mind-blowing. And speaking of mind-blowing, your research even went into the cosmos, suggesting that game theory could even help us understand the universe itself.
Yeah, that's definitely entering the realm of speculation. But it is a fascinating thought experiment. Some physicists believe that even at the tiniest level, subatomic particles might be interacting in a game-like way, constantly reacting to each other and trying to be as stable as possible.
It's like the universe is playing a game with itself. But how can we even begin to wrap our heads around that?
It is a tough concept, but it shows us that game theory could potentially help us understand not just human behavior, but maybe even the fundamental workings of reality.
Well, I think our brains need a little break after that mind-bending thought. We'll dive deeper into the cosmic side of game theory and how it applies to your specific goals and challenges in the next part of our deep dive. Welcome back to our deep dive on game theory. Before we got lost in space talking about, the universe playing games, we were discussing how these concepts play out in international relations. It's fascinating how something as complex as global politics can be analyzed, through this strategic lens.
Yeah, it really shows how versatile game theory is as a tool for understanding complex systems with all these different actors and competing interests. And it's not just about countries fighting for power either. The principles of game theory can apply to tons of real-world scenarios that you might encounter.
One of the things I've been thinking about is how game theory can actually help us make better decisions in our own lives. It's so easy to just get caught up in the day-to-day and react emotionally. But game theory offers a more strategic approach.
Absolutely. Game theory encourages us to take a step back and analyze things from a more objective point of view, considering the potential consequences of our actions and how other people are likely to respond. It's about thinking several steps ahead, almost like a chess player planning their moves.
So it's not about being like cold and calculating or anything, but more about being mindful and strategic in how we make decisions. It's about understanding the game we're playing, even if it's not always obvious.
Exactly. Let's say you're thinking about a big investment, like buying a house or starting a business. Game theory can help you assess the risks and potential rewards. You'd take into account things like market trends, interest rates, and even what other people in the market are doing.
That makes a lot of sense. Instead of just going with my gut, I can use game theory to look at the situation more objectively.
It's like having a framework for making smarter and more rational decisions.
Precisely. And it doesn't have to be just big decisions like investments. Game theory works for everyday stuff too. For example, imagine you're trying to get a better deal on a car. Understanding what the dealer wants their profit margins. Even the current demand for the car you want can give you an edge in the negotiation.
It's like game theory gives you the power to be a smarter, more strategic player in the game of life, right? No matter what challenges you're facing or what opportunities come up.
That's a great way to put it. And it's not always about personal gain either. Understanding game theory can help us build stronger relationships too.
Oh, interesting. I wouldn't have immediately thought of game theory in relationships. How does that work? Well, think about the concept of reciprocity we discussed earlier with that tit-for-tat strategy. In relationships, it's all about give and take. When both people are willing to cooperate, to be open and support each other, the relationship thrives. But if one person is always acting selfishly, taking without giving, it creates an imbalance, and that can really hurt the relationship.
So game theory can help us understand, the dynamics of relationships, how to make them more balanced and harmonious.
Exactly. It shows us how important communication and trust are, and how important it is to find solutions that benefit both people. It's about recognizing that relationships, like a lot of things in life, involve a certain amount of strategic interaction.
This is making me rethink my own relationships. It's not about winning or losing, but about finding a way to cooperate and create a win-win for everyone involved.
That's a great insight. And it's important to remember that not everyone plays by the same rules. Some people are just naturally more cooperative, while others are more competitive. Game theory helps us figure out these different types of players and then adjust our strategies accordingly.
That's a really helpful point. It's like knowing your opponent in a game of chess. You have to understand their strengths, weaknesses, and how they're likely to move to come up with a good counter strategy.
Exactly. And in life, just like in chess, sometimes the best move is to cooperate, and sometimes you have to be more assertive to protect yourself. Game theory gives us that framework for making those strategic decisions.
It's all about finding that balance, isn't it? Knowing when to cooperate and when to stand your ground.
Precisely. And recognizing that even in situations where there are clear winners and losers, there are often chances to find solutions that benefit everyone. Game theory encourages us to look deeper and consider what everyone wants and what the potential outcomes are for everyone involved.
It's kind of like we're cracking the code of human interaction. Like we're starting to understand these hidden rules that control how people act.
That's a great analogy. Game theory is like a tool to decipher those hidden rules,
Oh.
to understand that strategic dance that's happening in every part of our lives.
But let's not forget the big picture. We were talking before about how game theory might even apply to the universe itself. That's just mind-blowing.
It is a mind-boggling idea, for sure. But it makes you think about how universal game theory could be as a framework for understanding complex systems, whether we're talking about humans or, subatomic particles.
So if everything is a game, how do we figure out the rules? Are there universal principles that explain all these interactions from the smallest to the largest scale?
That's a question that scientists and philosophers have been trying to answer for ages, but maybe game theory can give us some clues. By studying the patterns and dynamics of strategic interactions, we might find some fundamental principles that apply across different levels of complexity.
It's like we're looking for a grand unified theory of strategy, a set of rules that explains everything from how particles interact to how countries negotiate treaties.
Now that's a fascinating thought. It highlights how game theory can be a bridge between different fields. It connects things like physics, economics, psychology, even philosophy.
It's like game theory is this ultimate interdisciplinary language, helping us connect the dots between all these different areas of knowledge.
That's a powerful insight, and it emphasizes how important it is to think strategically, to look beyond the surface, and really understand what motivates people and what could happen as a result of different actions.
This has been such an amazing journey. I feel like I see the world in a whole new way now, and I'm excited to start using these ideas in my own life.
It's been my pleasure sharing this deep dive with you. Remember, there are so many fascinating games out there, and with a little strategic thinking, we can all become better players.
And on that note, we'll leave you to think about the games you're playing and how you can use what you've learned to make the best moves. Stay tuned for the final part of our game theory adventure. Welcome back to the final part of our deep dive into game theory. It's been a real mind bender exploring this with you. It's like game theory gives us this secret decoder ring for understanding the world.
Yeah, it's been a really cool journey for me, too. We've covered a lot from, the basics of the prisoner's dilemma to the idea of the universe itself playing some kind of cosmic game.
One thing that's really stuck with me is that game theory isn't just about winning or losing. It's about understanding how everything interacts and finding strategies that, make things better for everyone.
That's so important. People often approach things with this win-lose mindset, thinking someone always has to come out on top. But game theory shows us that working together can often lead to better results for everyone.
It's like shifting from thinking about scarcity to thinking about abundance. Instead of fighting over a small pie, we can work together to bake a bigger one for everyone.
I love that analogy, and it really shows the power of game theory. It's not just about analyzing the games that already exist. It's about creating better ones, systems and structures that, encourage cooperation and lead to more fairness.
That's a really inspiring thought. It makes me wonder how we can use these principles, not just in our own lives, but also in bigger societal stuff. Could game theory help with things like climate change or income inequality?
Definitely. Game theory gives us real insights into designing policies and institutions that get people to work together. For example, understanding that tragedy of the commons thing, where people acting selfishly deplete a shared resource, can help us come up with strategies for sustainable resource management.
That's so relevant to so many problems we're facing today. It feels like game theory could be a powerful tool for creating a more just and sustainable world.
I think so too. By understanding the principles of game theory, we can be more deliberate about creating systems that promote cooperation, fairness, and, long-term well-being.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, what's the main thing you want our listener to take away? What's the most practical advice you can give for using game theory in their life?
I'd say the most important thing is to develop a strategic mindset. Be aware of the game you're in, understand what motivates the other players, and think a few steps ahead. Be proactive, not reactive. Make conscious choices instead of just reacting to things.
It's about being the player, not the pawn.
Exactly. And remember, game theory isn't about strict rules. It's more like a framework for understanding and navigating, these complex interactions. It's about using your knowledge of human behavior, understanding incentives, and thinking strategically to reach your goals and make the world a better place.
This has been an amazing journey. I feel like I've learned so much about how the world works, and I'm excited to start using these principles in my own life.
It's been great sharing this deep dive with you. Remember, the world is full of these fascinating games, and with a little strategic thinking, we can all play better.
And on that note, we'll leave you to think about the games you're playing and how you can use what you've learned to make the most strategic moves. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into game theory.